vote is unanimous, numbers 1 and 6. Thank you.
Well, you just saw those were the names of the people on the parole board voting today. Know that Susan Smith cannot get out of jail. Thank you for joining us for Friends at 5. I'm Andrea Mock, and we have 2 breaking news stories to bring you tonight. After 30 years behind bars, convicted killer Susan Smith went before a parole board today asking to be released. That request was denied. Also tonight, the suspect in the Bojangles shooting in Harbison has been arrested. We're going to have details on that in a moment, but first, let's get into what happened today at this parole hearing. Susan Smith, a woman from Union County who was killed her 2 young children 30 years ago, will in fact remain behind bars at least for another 2 years. Her parole was denied today. It was a very emotional day inside this hearing, as we heard not only from her ex-husband and the father of young Michael and Alex, but we also heard from family members and the 2 men who helped put her behind bars. News 19's Walker Lawson was in that parole hearing today and joins us now live with the very latest. Walker.
Well, Andrea, good evening. That is correct. It was a unanimous decision by 5 people on the parole board that she would not get parole. Now, this came over an hour after we heard from Susan Smith herself, her attorney, as well as friends of hers. Then we also heard from her ex-husband, David Smith, who asked for her to not be released, as you just mentioned a moment ago, as well as other family members. Here's what they had to say.
But ultimately, to me, that's only 15 years per child. Her own children. It's just not enough. So I'm asking that you please deny her parole today.
An emotional David Smith with an image of his 2 sons, Michael and Alex, pinned to his jacket, asking for Susan Smith, who killed their young boys, to be denied parole.
God gives us free choice. And she made free choice that night to end her life. This wasn't a tragic mistake. It wasn't something that she didn't mean to do. She purposely meant to end her life.
Before a decision was made, Susan Smith's attorney spoke, saying her decisions were rooted in mental health problems. Moments later, she begged the board to approve her parole, claiming she lied for 9 days because it would hurt too much to tell the family they would never see the boys again.
I didn't lie to get away with it. I really didn't. I was just scared. I didn't know how I could tell the people that loved them that they would never see them again. I didn't know how I could tell David he couldn't see his sons again.
David Smith spoke with the media after parole was denied.
You know, Susan, in the last 30 years, through her action, has continued to proven that it's all about her. What all this has done to her, how it has affected her. I haven't seen any remorse from her.
David Smith promises they will come back every 2 years to keep justice alive for Michael and Alex.
2 more years to go through this again, but at least I know for now she'll still be behind bars. And for 2 more years, there'll still be justice for Michael and Alex.
Now again, Andrea, when you are sentenced to life, back when she committed this crime, it was only 30 years to life. So she will be able to come and try to seek parole every 2 years. Now that law has changed, but again, we did hear from members of the family and from the prosecution that represented the family last time that it is something difficult that you have to deal with to come back every 2 years. But as he mentioned, they plan to do so moving forward. We'll have more tonight at 6. You'll hear more from Susan and from her ex-husband, David. Andrea.
All right, Walker, thank you so much. I'm so glad he explained that as well, that those were the sentencing guidelines back in 1995 when Smith was sentenced. Now, life in prison means life in prison. But again, this will go on for the family every 2 years. And let's speak a little bit more about that family, because they packed into the hearing today to have their voices heard. And many shared the emotional trauma that came with the deaths of these 2 young boys, Alex and Michael. The uncle of David Smith, his name is Doug Smith. He was with the family in the days after the little boy's death, and he said making the funeral arrangements for these 2 little boys was one of the worst moments of his life.
But the Friday morning after, David, his dad, my brother's wife, and I, the 4 of us, were sitting at Holcomb Funeral Home in Union and discussing the funeral arrangements. David asked to see the boys, and Mr. Holcomb had a funny look on his face, and he said, "Mr. Smith, could I see you?" So we went out, and he said, "You know, your nephew can't see the boys." And he told me why. He said, "You know, the boys were in the water for 9 days." So I went back and told David, I said, "You know, it's better that you don't see the boys." And I think deep down he understood why.
Oh, well, current 16th solicitor now, Kevin Brackett, was actually a prosecutor on this case all those years ago, and he asked to speak also at the parole board today. In his speech, Solicitor Brackett talked about some of the evidence. He said he pulled it out of the closet and was reviewing it before coming, and he says there was a note from Susan Smith's boyfriend at the time who she was having an affair with. He said their relationship was the motive behind her killing her babies, and he said she killed her babies on purpose so that she could continue to have an affair.
Evidence like the note that was written to Susan Smith by her boyfriend, the man she was cheating on her husband with, who told her in the note that he could not be with her anymore because he didn't want children, and that they had no long-term future because he didn't want children. And then 1 week later, she's rolling her car down the ramp at John D. Long Lake with her 2 children strapped into the back.
Well, Brackett went on to say this was not a suicide attempt, but instead she deliberately rolled her kids into the water with her wedding dress inside the car and her wedding album inside the car, and planned to basically sink her old life before she started a new one. Now, we have full coverage of the hearing today on WLTX Plus. You can find that on Apple and Roku and Fire Stick. We also have our coverage posted to WLTX.com.